one of the biggest raids, I guess you would call it, in the Air Force at Pulaski, I believe they pronounce it. But that was a humongous affair. And this particular picture, I don't know whether you've ever heard of Jimmy Doolittle. He was the fellow that took the B-25s off of a ship in the Pacific and bombed Tokyo. Very minor, but it was a step in the right direction. There's a general's autograph and several others. This is a picture of the Memphis Belle, which was the first airplane bomber in Europe to have 25 raids. So they got to come back and sell war bonds and flirt with women.
Those women on the back wall?
Oh, those! They're veterans.
They are?
Oh, yes! Well, you know, there has to be color in a bachelor's room.
Of course.
Sure. But, now there's my World War II stuff. Anyway, I've got some good autographs in there and so forth and so on. But anyway, let me look at this real quick.
You can go from there.
Okay. If I need to raise the volume, let me know and that kind of stuff. But I think normally I'll be fine. But...
The microphone will pick it up.
Oh, okay. My name is Charile Frasier. I'm a resident of Homestead at the Hickory View, Washington, Missouri. And I know I don't look old enough, but believe it or not, I've actually been here 7 years, March the 1st. And I came here because my wife, I was a caregiver for about 10 years, and I had to put her in a nursing home because she had a fractured back. Well, I don't cook and never have, so I decided that while I was not fit for a nursing home, I would be better off if I came here at Hickory View. I was able to bring my wife here for 2 months, and she passed away within 2 months after she got here. And I was a caregiver for about 10 years, but I'm very happy to be here. It's a good place for an older man who can't cook. They clean for me, they baby me a lot, so it is a good place. And it's unfortunate that a lot of older people are reluctant to even visit a place like this because they don't want to be a resident, but I highly recommend it. I was born October 5th, 1926 in Council Bluffs, Iowa. I am now then, of course, 86. I don't look it, of course, but that's the way it goes. But I grew up without a father. He was one of these nincompoops that never contributed to our support. And I had a brother and my mother. She had a 3rd grade education, and he just, when he decided he did not want to be married, he took off. And believe it or not, I saw him one time before he passed away in all that time. And he died, he was around 75 years old. He was about 12 years older than my mother, and he was a barber. I can remember him when we were small putting us on the dining room table and cutting our hair, and if we moved, whack. We didn't move very often. But I really am sorry I don't know him very well, and I really don't. I don't know much about him at all. But he just never helped us, and my mother went to work because we had no money, and she was a steam presser in a garment factory, and she pushed a 12-pound steam iron all day long with a little tiny oscillating fan on the end of her ironing board. And my brother and I sold magazines and newspapers, anything to help out. So my young life was barefooted, overalls, and whatever fun we had to make it. But we did. I graduated from high school when I was 16 in 1943. I convinced my mother to sign for me so I could enlist in the U.S. Army. She didn't want to, of course, but she was not that alert about the war. Needless to say, with a third grade education, she had a lot to learn, but she was a beautiful mother, and we were always very grateful for her sacrifices that helped us in later life. But she did sign for me, and I enlisted at 17. I went in the infantry as a replacement training person. They cut our training from maybe like, say, 21 weeks, and I think we ended up with 12 weeks training, because that was about the time of a very famous battle in World War II, which was the Battle of the Bulge. They decided that in 12 weeks we were animals, could kill, you know, and they were so crazy because I couldn't. But anyway, you know, that's my abbreviated training in the military. I had about 5 days at home, which included travel on a train. I went back out to the East Coast telling my mother that I would, you know, never get overseas. They weren't going to put me over there. I had flat feet and all kinds of stuff that, you know, would keep you out of the service, but didn't keep me. But the taxi driver that took me to the train station, he said, "Oh my God, you're little, you'll never go." Well, I was getting pretty confident that I wasn't going to go. Well, we got to the East Coast, and within a week we were on a troop ship headed for Europe. You had bunks that were like 6 bunks high, and being so small, I was on the top, which I didn't care much for, but I was one of the few that did not get sick, so I was on KP, which they call kitchen police, the whole cruise, which really wasn't a cruise because we zigzagged. We were in a 100-ship convoy. The second night out, 2 ships collided, and of course we were down in the hold of the ship, and we were sure it was submarines and airplanes, but it turned out 2 of them had collided with each other, and they killed a couple of people, but we couldn't go out. They wouldn't let us go. They were afraid somebody would smoke and all that. I don't know how long it took. I can't remember for sure, but I would say it was 3 weeks before we got over there. And you can, of course, fly over there now in 7-8 hours, so that was a long time. We landed at what they call cigarette camps, like Lucky Strike, Camel, Pall Mall, Pell Mell, whatever, you know. And then we got sent up into near the German border, and we were in what they call a Repel depot, which was an infantry replacement depot. We were there a couple of nights and were sent to join an artillery outfit, a 155 howitzer outfit that had been there for probably 6 months. And they were going to use us as what they call observers, which was to go up front and look out and find out how far away, you know, people were and this and that. And we could hear the guns in the distance, and the 88s that the Germans had were just bang, 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 bang. It was just constant. And I was 17 and scared to death. If someone had been careless and foolish, I'd have probably shot them, because I would have figured they were the enemy. But we didn't do that. We didn't have to. But it was not a good experience when you'd never been anywhere before and no father. We as a result of the first several weeks, we were considered in a combat zone, which was the last battle of Central Europe. And that was thrilling. Then they wanted me to go to the 15th Army headquarters, and to be very honest with you, I can't remember the city where that was, but wherever it was, they were pretty bombed out. I know we were in one town that there was a statue of Bismarck in the intersection, and we would ride up to the top, and I've got a picture of it somewhere in a book, and then go down about a quarter of a mile, and we were in a bombed out building. That's where we stayed, and it was just, you can't believe how demolished those cities were. I mean, our people and the English and, you know, bombed the living daylights out of Germany. And then they were going to train me to be in cryptography work, which is codes and things like that. Well, the next day I was told my orders had been canceled and I was going back to my old outfit, and we were going to get on a ship, come back through the canal zone, and go to Japan. This was before they dropped the atomic bomb. Then we got into Belgium and they stopped us, and we camped out for a couple of weeks, and they said, you won't be going because they've dropped the atomic bomb, and they, or otherwise you would have gone on to Japan to be in the occupation forces. And they were still fighting like mad over there, all the islands, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. You know, I, again, was a very lucky person that we did not go. But I stayed in Europe for 13 months, and we chased prisoners, German prisoners, who would unload trains and work in supply type activity, and we just guard them with a loaded gun, because, you know, if they messed around, we shot them. And they you know, that was a part of life. And I guarded American prisoners on occasion, and they would be 10 shackled together, and if they escaped, you served their sentence. And I mean, that's the way it was. And if you don't think I would have shot one, you're crazy, because I would have. I didn't want to be serving their time, because they had raped, and, you know, they were bad people. But you kept busy, because, you know, we kept thinking we were going to the South Pacific, and that would have been a long haul, long haul. But I was a very fortunate young man. I went in when I was 17, got out when I was 19. And I was in from 44 to 44. Came back home, and I was an office boy in the Kansas City Southern Railway Company when I first started. And I was, you know, 19, but I felt like I was 120. And there was a young girl, excuse me, cute like you two, about 17 or 18, and she led me around by the nose the first couple of days. And after being in the war, I just felt very embarrassed. So first night or two, I went home and was telling my mother that, I said, I just don't like this job. I can't cope with that. And I heard an ad on the radio that said they were looking for veterans to be employed by the Veterans Administration, which is where all the files on each veteran was collected, and so forth and so on. And of course, they were coming home by the thousands to be discharged, and they guaranteed us overtime quite a bit, and that my salary was going to be I think $1,940 a year, which to me was a lot of money. So I went to work for them, and I stayed with the federal government as an employee I ended up with the Federal Aviation Administration, and they're involved with the safety of aircraft in the air, on the ground, electronic navigational aids, and it was a fun organization to work for. So I ended up with a total of about 41 years of working for the government, and I retired at age 53. I have enjoyed retirement ever since. I have volunteered in Fort Worth, Texas at the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. I've got a total, I would say, of almost 10 years volunteering. And I worked in the information booth, and that's exciting. But I didn't get paid, but it was exciting. Working for the Federal Aviation Administration and the Department of Army as a civilian, I had 2 years in Casablanca, French Morocco. Very close friends with Humphrey Bogart, Katharine Hepburn, you know, Ingrid Bergman, who was in Casablanca. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But then I worked for 2 years in the Canal Zone, and I hate to be negative, before we gave it away. Mr. Carter did that, much to my sorrow. And that was a fun place to be. I was single, but I went through the canal on a dredge boat, which is a little dredge boat, and then a big cruiser in the same lock with you, and that was kind of fun. But it was, you know, it was hard to get used to palm trees and things like that, and no seasons. But that was 2 years of good duty. When in French Morocco, I met a young lady who lived in Granite City and came over there to work. Well, I was ready to come home, so she wasn't ready to come home yet. But we dated and had a good time. But then I came back, and then she had some medical problems and came back also. And I kept in touch with her by writing. And when I was working in the Canal Zone, they sent me home to a 2-week training course in Washington, D.C. And I stopped in St. Louis, and she picked me up with her brother and his wife, and I spent the night in her home, met her parents and so forth, and asked her if she could come to Kansas City, see me for a couple of days. And I didn't have enough money to pay her way, but she paid her way. And she came, and we went out to eat and dance and this and that. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, I gave her a little kiss and asked her to marry me. She said yes. And about that time, I blew the horn. And everybody in this big residential apartment building turned on their lights. So it was a little embarrassing, but it was a very good night. And then she came to Canal Zone, and we got married. And then we came back to Kansas City, and I still work for the government. But then I heard about a job in Brussels, Belgium, with the Federal Aviation Administration, and that was a turning point in my life, I think. I enjoyed working for the FAA, as it was called, because it was a fun organization. And, you know, some of the government agencies are old and they're straight-laced, and to work with, like, Medicare and Medicaid, and that wouldn't excite me. So I was, again, very fortunate that I was working with the government with FAA, and I watched, it was Civil Aeronautics Administration, became a department in itself, and then it went under the Department of Transportation. So I've been very fortunate in my life of being at the right place at the right time, and that does help. But I have had a good work life. I've had a good marriage. We were married for 51 years plus, and I think that being married 50 years is a very significant time in your life. It's something that a lot of people can't make, and it takes two. But as I say, I had a good marriage, but I won't discuss this very much in detail, but my wife and I did adopt 2 children. They were true blubber. They were 2 brother and sister, and the girl was 2 and the boy was 1. And they had told us that, I said, what about heredity and genes? And don't worry about it. You're going to be the parents. Well, we had difficulty, much difficulty with both of them. And I am not very close to them right now. In fact, I haven't talked to them or seen them I haven't seen them in over 2 or 3 years, and I haven't talked to them in probably a year. But it's just the way life works. And again, as I say, I've had a good life, a good marriage, and a good work, and this and that, so you've got to take the bad with the good sometimes. But I'm glad we made the effort. But I miss my wife very much, and if I had it to do over again, I would bring her here today. But without a lot of fanfare, that's basically my life from little to big. Now, if you would like to ask any questions, I'm sure I didn't get quite everything in your paper, but we can pick that up.
You just want to cut it off and then stitch it together, whatever you guys call it.
Oh,
You can show.
yeah.
Got it. So,
Yeah, we talked to her.
so how were you treated when you returned home from the service?
Well, back when I returned home, it was in August of 44. No, I'm sorry, August of 46. The war in Japan ended in 45. But I came back to the States and I didn't get out right away. But when we landed in New York on a troop ship, they had a tugboat. And when the war, like in Europe, was over, and then in Japan, and the guys, we had a point system. And you had to have 21 points. I'm not sure, it's been a long time ago. My brain is a little clouded. But I had 20-some, I think. But I didn't get out right away because, some of these guys were in the military for 4 and 5 years. They're the real heroes. And those guys that were prisoners, oh my goodness, that's, but they had this little tugboat that shot water. But when they really had a celebration was, when the war was just over and they had, the harbors were filled and all kinds of tugboats and shots going on, But I thought they treated us very well. And of course we were eligible to go to college, and we were eligible for, I think, unemployment for 20 or 21 weeks or something like that, which I did not do because I didn't want to take that. I wanted to go to work, so I did. But you could have used that, but I did use my college. I didn't use it my whole 4 years, but I completed, pretty close to a year and a half of night school. But I thought we were treated well, not like Vietnam. No, those guys got the bad end of the draw.
So what was your most memorable experience while you were serving?
Well, I think that to be 17 years old and not knowledgeable about the ways of the world that much, and to be in Europe and be in a war and almost got on the other side of the ocean, in the Pacific, I just think I was very fortunate. I can talk about it, and here I am, and that makes a big difference. My very best friend, who went in after I did, and we graduated together, he was killed just before the end of the war in Europe, and I knew he was in the military, but I didn't know where he was. And he was pretty close to the end of the European war. He was shot by a sniper and killed. My mother never told me that's the way it was back then. Or I could have probably gone to see his grave, because they were all buried in these national cemeteries, and they're beautiful. But I didn't know he had been killed till I got home. Very sad. And he was my buddy, My brother, I had one brother, and he was a year and a half older than me, and he's been dead now a year or two. But he's big, handsome dude, and I was the little kid brother. But we weren't that close as brothers because he was so big. But he was a good brother.
So what did you do to entertain yourself while you were overseas?
Well, tell you the truth, in the very beginning, they entertained you. I'm very serious, but then after the war in Europe was over, we got to the point where we would form a softball team and travel in France and Germany and Belgium and play other teams. And of course, I'd never had a drink when I was 17 years old, but I would go out with the guys and we'd have some beers and so forth. And then the different countries, the ladies would come to the USO dances, and I have always been one to take advantage of learning. There's an awful lot to learn in this old world. So I was always busy, and everything fascinated me. And I even learned to drive a Jeep, because we didn't have a car when I went in the military, and so it was tough duty, because I run the Jeep up on a sidewalk, almost run into a building. But it was fun. No, I kept myself busy, and then we had a lot of training, But there was, when we were guarding those prisoners, both German and American, it was a tough day. We were on duty a long time. And then, you didn't want to have to kill anybody. But if you didn't, I'm sure they would have put me in to serve the remainder of their time. So I was not going to let that happen. But we never had to do that. But we did. We would have 10 bad guys shackled together, and the front one had a shovel, dig a hole, the second would cover it up, and we'd just walk around a big field like that all day long. But anyway.
So what was the food and the hygiene and all that kind of stuff like?
Okay. My worst memory is after the war in Europe was over, and we ate a lot of K rations, of course, and then they would try to cook them and this and that. And we would have a lot of stew, and we had some Belgian women who did laundry for us. And I think my worst vision is several of these women going into a big barrel with thrown out stew, and then bringing it out, and their arms were covered up to here. And you would almost get sick. They didn't have food, we did. But it was not a pretty sight. I can visualize, even today, the orange arms from the stew. And stuff like that. But then as time progressed, several of us would go to taverns and have like scrambled eggs, piece of ham. You know, the restaurants had it, but not a lot of the people did. And we would enjoy going out like that just to eat. But we had pretty good food in the military. It was available, but I'm not sure how healthy it was. But you can tell I'm not full grown yet. No, I'm kidding.
So, do you still keep in touch with anybody that you served with? Or?
I am sorry to say I don't even know any high school person that graduated with me that's still alive. I never got to go to a dance in school. I was working. In fact, my last year in high school, I worked as a tool boy in a welding shop. This was in Kansas City. I worked from midnight to 8 in the morning, and I went to work. I went home. No, I'm sorry. I went to school at 9 o'clock and stayed till 3. Then I went home, food and sleep. And now, I'm not trying to be racial in what I'm saying now, but in Kansas City, we lived in a big residential building, apartment building. And our school was called Manual High and Vocational School. It was surrounded by the black neighborhood, but they could not go to school with us. But my bad part was going to work at midnight and have to walk 4 to 6 blocks. And I was beat up several times just for no good reason, but that was life back then. And but that was one of the worst parts of my life, I think, when I had to work and go to school. But then when I started working, you know, after the military and went to work for the government, I've had, you know, many long hours for a day and this and that, and especially when I got married, we had fun. And you know, the world over there is not today, it's not like it was then. Today, I would not want to be there. I don't think we're loved anymore or respected, and I would not want to be there.
So, how had the community changed while you were overseas? The community that you were from?
Can I be honest?
Of course.
When I went over, we lived a block from the houses of prostitution and the blacks. When I came back, we were in a white neighborhood out in an area where it was another apartment building, but it was not as big. And like in the one originally, there were 3 families on the first floor, 1 bathroom. So my mother used slop jars. We were bathed in just a plain old tub. And that was our life. But when we came back, the landlord had bought a nicer building, and my mother moved with them, and then we stayed there for a while. I mean, my brother and I, before we decided to head out on our own. But life could have been better.
Is there anything else that you'd like to tell me about?
I'm glad I'm who I am, and I'm not sure that I would feel as comfortable in this present state of affairs as I was when Roosevelt died and I thought I would never get home again, you know, and I just, I would not want to change anything. Life is what it is. 35 minutes.
That's fine. Breaks out your talking forward.
That's a lot of bull.
Blue Jay Journal, they have that.
Yeah, is that what this is going to be on?
No, they have a bunch of different like veterans.
Charlie has
It's interesting. You might be able to see it. I think they're doing it at the Historical Society.